Dental Assisting Council. Want me to go ahead, Tom? Okay. Okay, so the Dental Assisting Council met on August 23rd, 2018. Roll was called and quorum was established. We had introductions of Dental Assisting Council members. Then we accepted the minutes of the May 14th, 2015 meeting. Ms. Wallace gave the council a presentation on the overview of the Dental Assisting Council. Next, we heard an update on dental assisting program and course applications and RDA program reevaluations, and reviewed the statistics provided in the board packet. On conclusion of that item, we moved to an update on dental assisting examination statistics, and the council reviewed that information provided and had questions answered. Next, we heard an update on dental assisting licensing statistics and reviewed the available statistics that were provided. We received an update on combining of the RDA registered dental assistant law and ethics and general examinations, and the report indicated that that exam has in fact been combined and is being given and appears to be going well. Finally, agenda item 9, which we just included, the council received a presentation by Joan Griefeld, representative of the RDAEF Association and J Production Seminars, on the addition of the administration of local anesthesia and nitrous oxide and oxygen to be administered by RDAEFs with additional training. We received a presentation and supplemental information that will be distributed as handouts that included model language as well as a copy of the PowerPoint for both training and educational regulations for administration of local anesthesia and nitrous oxide. There was discussion, and the board members, council members requested additional information to be provided and researched and provided by staff, with the direction that we would table this motion until it could be agendized for a future meeting, the November meeting if possible, for further discussion and consideration for action. We heard public comment and received testimony both in favor and in support of and in opposition to this agenda item. With that, I neglected to ask for a request for any future agenda items. Is anybody? So I think we have enough to keep us busy. So we'll go ahead with that. And with that, we adjourn the meeting. So that is the report of the Dental Assisting Council.
Thank you, Dr. Witcher. That was an engaging conversation, so thank you. All right, we've just so that for the audience to understand, for this afternoon, we've got a few more items to go through before we get to our closed session. So we're going to work till about 4 o'clock, and then we're gonna go into our closed session, just so that you understand our timing. So we, at this point, I believe we have a discussion of possible action regarding recommendations for registered dental assistant extended function examiners. And Tina?
Thank you. Business and Professions Code Section 1753.4 outlines that examiners grading the registered dental assistant in extended functions examination be appointed by the board. Currently, we have 8 examiners participating in the RDAEF examinations that we are requesting be reappointed, and 7 examiners that would require new appointment. All of these examiners have been participating and have been calibrated and have been approved by our chief examiner, and we're just asking that they be appointed for continuing to grade the examinations.
Any comments, questions from the board? need a vote, I think, right? Or do we need a motion?
I'll move appointment of the proposed list of RDAEF examiners.
Thank you.
Okay, the,
So,
I'm sorry. We do need some discussion around the board and then public comment. So, Dr. Chan, were you about to start that?
well, I was going to ask a question. Do I need to recuse myself if I know some of the members on this? No? Okay.
Well, it would just depend to what extent do you know them. What kind of a personal relationship? Is there any financial linkage between them? Would it somehow affect your ability to render an unbiased judgment or vote?
No financial interest with any of them. Any linkages, not directly. And would it bias decision-making? No. But I had to at least raise the question.
so out of that, if we were to receive an appeal, you wouldn't know who the
Sorry.
examiner was.
Right. Right, correct. So the examiners are identified by numbers on all of the grading materials, so there would be no way that the board member would know which specific examiner did what.
Further questions, comments? Public comment? Seeing none, I think we're ready for the vote.
Okay, we're voting on the discussion and possible actions regarding the recommendations for RDAEF examiners. Okay, Burden. Chan? Lai? Laren? Lay? McKenzie? Medina? Morrow? Alagi? Pacheco? Stewart?
Yes.
Witcher? You? Unanimous.
Thank you, Tina. Moving on to item number 9, report on the June 1920 Oral Health Summit hosted by the California Department of Public Health. I think we have 2 members that attended that. Ms. Burton, are you addressing that?
This was a 2-day meeting to roll out the state health plan, and that's the plan which all of you got copies of a couple of months ago. And so the invitees were counties and programs and this was their opportunity to do workshops and ask questions to help to bring their plans up to speed. It was just a delightful meeting because there's finally funds to do things. There's opportunities for people to collaborate in ways that they have not before. And for its part, the Department of the Oral Health Department brought all of their people out. They brought the director, they brought a number of agency personnel, and it just was very, very well received. And I think so were the people who spent the time, including the dental board, in helping to put this plan together. There were some things that I'm glad that we were there to pop up and address, and Hoon's going to tell you about that.
So, the state plan has been in the works for probably 2 years or so now. And just like Fran said, I think both Fran and I are very happy to see that it's finally being rolled out, that there's really a roadmap, for how to help solve the access to care issue in California. I must say that we were particularly happy to be there. And I would encourage the board to continue the participation, at this Oral Health Summit. There was some misinformation that was provided, at this summit for example, one of the speakers mentioned, actually gave the wrong number of dental assisting programs that are in California. And so Fran and I had to correct the speaker. There were also discussions on, various issues. And basically, there was, it seems to me that even the stakeholders who attended the meeting were not fully aware of the function of the dental board, the different categories of licenses, for example, and also the various duties, of the different categories. So it was good that we were there, to provide some of that information, correct information. Let's put it that way. And yeah, and even like there were a lot of discussions on workforce, the adding different team members to the dental team, topics like that. So I think we were there to give them the information of how the licensure works, and so anyway, so I think many of them were really surprised to hear how many different licensure categories that we already have, on the book. So anyway, again, I have to say that, we've attended several meetings. This was probably the best meeting I felt, that we were able to be there and contribute to, a lot to the, to the Oral Health Summit.
What I would add is the audience for this were not all dentists and dental providers. There were program people. And so very clearly, there were people who had no idea that there even was a dental board and knew nothing about the function of the board. And so to have people who were invited to lead discussions and lead workshops to give false information was really, really unfortunate. I would say that that was probably the worst part about it. But the opportunity for people to come together and know that now they have those networking abilities was really, really positive, and very positive that that we could start something and it actually had an end date and it's going to be implemented. And for me, who sang this Access to Care song forever, the fact that we are going to be able to serve people in the state who otherwise would not have access through this funding was my best takeaway. So that's it.
Can you share future dates of their meetings, or how often will they meet, and have they published that?
We kind of don't know. We just get a notice, hold this date. So we don't know, and it just kind of depends. And I would say that what's coming up next in terms of a statewide meeting will be looking at further implementation issues in out years. But there are regional meetings constantly for people who are actually receiving the funds and implementing the programs in their counties all the time. But we just get a notice.
Yeah, we usually just get
Not a
notice maybe like
calendar.
a month or two, in advance of the meetings. And this last one was actually pretty much sold out. They had a long wait list for people that signed up. Anyway, but like I said, this it's all. I felt like the public doesn't really know what the dental board is all about. They have no idea that we actually address the access to care issue and the workforce, and really, so we were glad that we were there to be able to provide the scope of what the dental board does, the responsibilities that we have, and I thought it was quite interesting, but it was refreshing at the same time that we were that we happened to be there and that we were able to provide the information that was so much needed, I think.
And so occasionally we get things like a message that came yesterday, and it's about a webinar on that's being conducted by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And it is on the Health Initiatives Value-Based Payment Team. And so they're talking about contracting approaches that aim to improve caries management. So we get messages like this all the time. So there will be various webinars that are related to implementation, but as far as statewide programs, there are, I don't know when we will meet again, but we'll certainly keep everyone informed.
So I'm assuming that information comes through our office and maybe the entire board is maybe has been notified and I'm missing it, or maybe we can just make sure that we are being notified as a board when those meetings come up. And then
I think I kind of don't understand your question, and maybe we need to talk about this offline. But you know, as far as the statewide meetings, Hoon and I get those messages, and then when we get those, I send them to you and Karen, because it's not something. It's not a meeting for the entire board.
Right.
It's the board's representatives. And if I'm missing something, let's talk about
no,
it.
sounds good. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much.
In terms of the meetings, is there a central clearinghouse? And I know that you're talking about statewide, but is there a central clearinghouse for all of these meetings, or do you know of a central clearinghouse for all of these types of meetings?
I do not know.
I would say it would be the Office of Oral Health.
Yeah, I think it would be the Office of Oral Health at the Department of Healthcare Services, and maybe we could sign up. Anybody, I suppose, could sign up. But I think when they have meetings, they are very selective, of who they want to invite, because usually it's like limited, number of attendees that they can accommodate. I know that Dr. Jay Kumar came to the board probably 3 years ago, and he was the one that asked the board to participate, in the statewide planning, and that's how we became engaged. But I don't know how to get on that email list. I'm sorry.
Public? Well, I think we're ready to move on to item number 10. Discussion and possible action regarding the draft of the board's sunset review report, and I believe Ms. Fisher is going to lead that discussion.
Okay, so let's fasten your seatbelts. We're going to take this section by section, and depending on how it goes, we could actually extend the discussion until 4:30 because the closed session is rather short, and I anticipate closed session probably could be done in a half hour, 45 minutes, so you'd actually be done with the meeting by 5:15. Give you some time off. We also have, if it looks like you're in a coma as we're going through this report, we will stop the discussion and continue it tomorrow. There's an awful lot of information that hopefully you at least got into a little bit, and so we can discuss. There are a number of pieces still missing, so we will be talking about calling another meeting in October to finalize the report, because then we send it off to a printer and it has to be submitted to the legislature in final form and approved by the board by December 1st. So our November meeting isn't until like the 28th and 29th. That wouldn't give us enough time. We'll see how we go, and we'll talk about whether or not the October meeting would be an in-person meeting in Sacramento or whether it could be done by teleconference. So just kind of think about that at the back of your mind, but we definitely will be scheduling another meeting between now and November. So I know that you all read it and found it riveting. Many of you are going through this again, and you'll see the similarities to the report that was essentially submitted to the legislature 4 years ago. I thought we'd go by section by section, and when I said I'm interested in looking for grammar, punctuation, and spelling, it was sort of tongue-in-cheek, meaning please just read the report, because we would be here for probably a week to catch all the errors. We're actually probably going to have an editor take a look at this after we get the bulk of the information together and smooth it all out so that it'll be presentable. So we're going to start with section 1, which is the background of the organization. This is typically information that really doesn't change from time to time. What we have noted on page 2 essentially is that we do have one vacancy on the board, and we're going to indicate that that's a public member vacancy at this point, so we'll put that clarification forward. Does anybody have any questions about page 1 or page 2? Is it pretty, and please don't hesitate, if something's not clear, let us know. We're not going to wordsmith, we're just going to mark it as needing further clarification, and so we'll be moving on. Okay, so we'll go on to here, page 3. Essentially, this talks about the statutory responsibilities of the Dental Assisting Council. Gives you a little bit of information also about our Diversion Evaluation Committee. And for the new members, we are actually going to have a presentation at our November meeting about our diversion program. We're going to have some speakers who will outline that. We had the speaker address the board a number of years ago. Some of you may recall that, and they're being asked back to give us an update on the diversion program. So then we go on. Board members may not be familiar with the fact that we do have an elective facial cosmetic surgery permit credentialing committee. This is a very specialized committee, and essentially people holding oral surgeons are able to submit operative reports to be able to do cosmetic procedures. And when this was initiated back in 2008, 2009, they anticipated it would be a permit that many oral surgeons might try to obtain. I think we're only up to, after all these years, 10 years, we only have 28, 29 licensees that have gone through it. It's a pretty rigorous program. It's easier to get the permit right after you've come out of training. It's a little bit more difficult to get it if you've been practicing for a while. So that committee is working diligently to represent the board. Our standing committees on the board are the Enforcement Committee, the Exam Committee. We also have our ad hoc committees, which are considered the Access to Care, the Anesthesia Committee, the newly formed Anesthesia Committee, the Ledge-Reg Committee, Licensing Certification, and Substance Use Awareness Committee. Does anybody have any questions essentially so far?
I have a question.
Oh,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just have a question regarding the Anesthesia Committee as far as its title is concerned. Obviously, anesthesia would include local anesthesia as well as sedation, general anesthesia. Is it too broad of a term, anesthesia generally, for that committee? Because its focus really is on sedation and general anesthesia, not on local anesthesia. Just a question.
How does the board feel about that? I don't know that for this report we necessarily have to clarify that, but we'll certainly make a note of that. And when we have our next anesthesia committee, perhaps the committee could discuss that as part of an agenda item as to what it entails.
I was looking at it from a standpoint of committee members that are not familiar with our proceedings here, and we know that it's focused on sedation and general anesthesia, but are the Senate and the Assembly committee members going to be aware of that from the title, from the name of the committee?
Okay, we'll take a further look at that and see if we should clarify that. Thank you for that comment. Joanne?
Yes, and then looking at the makeup of the committees, I don't see where the RDH fits in any of these committees.
Well, I guess I'm not understanding what you mean where you fit in. You can serve on any of these committees that you would like
Okay.
to. At the end of every year, when the new board president comes in, he asks all members where their interests in and what committees they would like to serve. You're new, and so I think you had mentioned you wanted to be, I think, on the Legislative and Regulations Committee, but you have the option of serving on as many committees as you would like.
I guess because it lists it as, 5 members consisting of 3 dentists and 2 public members.
That's what the current makeup is.
Okay.
We'll modify that because does the legislative committee say? It doesn't have you there. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I'm just saying,
Okay,
in
okay.
general, an RDH in the language.
Well,
I guess is what I'm wondering.
this was essentially an identification of the current members on those committees.
I see, okay.
And so, but you should have been mentioned
So
on
it
the
will be
Leg Reg committee
reflected.
because you
I see.
did mention that. We'll make a
Sure.
note of that and add that.
So we're updating these committees.
The committees, the numbers on the committees represent what our current committee, who currently is on the committee.
Right.
So that will change
so
from
it's
year to
my-
year.
Yeah, I understand it now.
Yeah, okay, all right, thank you.
And the person who was in your position previously served on a number of committees.
If it was just broad language.
No, it's a very good question. No, it's a very good
Who is
question.
on the board at the
Because
time.
it should be representing what our current committee makeup is.
Sure.
And so staff will go back and make sure that everybody's accounted for. Now, I know a number of the other new members haven't been appointed to a committee yet, and that's okay, because you can still take time and decide where you think you might want to do for next year, because I don't anticipate we'll have committee meetings in November necessarily. But if you know, we always put out a call for committees before the end of the year, and then the incoming president has the ability to work with me, and we try to accommodate everybody's requests for what committees they would like to serve.
Thank you for the clarification.
Oh, you're welcome.
I have a question. Karen, can you please lay out, before we start, the timeline in terms of where this goes, where we're starting now? We're going to come back and revisit at the next board meeting, and the dates that it could possibly go before legislature.
Okay, so we have to have another meeting in October, a special meeting, to finalize this report. It will be submitted to the legislature by December 1st. The legislative staff takes our information, they put their own report together, which consists of a background of the dental board, and then they'll identify issues that they would like the board to respond to. That happens January, February. March, we probably will have our hearing. We'll go before the legislature in March. Typically, it's the executive officer and the president, or it could be whoever the board decides to go forward, but it's typically the executive officer. Assistant executive officer is there to answer questions. Chief of enforcement is there to answer questions. Could be the vice president, could be a number of different people. We try to keep the number down. Is that what you're meaning in terms of the schedule?
Yes.
Okay.
Just give
So,
background.
and then what happens is the oversight committee of the legislature puts recommendations in a bill that essentially reconstitutes the dental board. So everything that's in our Practice Act will be repeated in a new bill. The you know, the number of members on the board, the fact that we have an executive officer, how we operate, that's all renewed for an additional 4 years, if everything goes well. If for some reason things don't go well, they can renew for a shorter period of time, have us go back, do research, see whether we can make improvements. That rarely happens, but it does happen on occasion. It'll be going through the hearing process next year this time, and it should go to the governor's, the bill essentially extending the board's authority should go to the governor's desk by the end of September next year. And then we should know in October whether the board has been extended. Does anybody have any questions? We'll be talking about that. We'll continue to talk about the process as we move along. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. So you all hopefully took a look at your attendance records that are reported here, and if you think something is wrong, send it to Jerry. We're not going to be going over that right now, but you can see that not only are your appointing authorities keeping track of your attendance and your participation, but the legislature is too. So all that information is there for all of our committee people, our dental assisting council. So it's important to be able to attend our meetings and to participate. So then we jump to page 46 after we get past all that. Essentially 46 talks about any changes that have been made at the board in the last 4 years. And so this is a summary of essentially what we did, what the board was able to accomplish. We talk about the effectiveness of the portfolio examination. It's hard to believe we've been dealing with the portfolio all this time, and yet it's still new. It's still new. So it was effective in 2014. This is an explanation of where we are with that. Dr. Rich, you had a question?
Yeah. I just sort of have an organizational question. I mean, a lot of these responses are things that we did, but the question really is, describe any major changes to the board. Things that we did are not necessarily major changes. And so I would suggest that there's a number of things that are listed here that probably ought to be reorganized, and that this start off with things like strategic planning, appointments to the board, changes in membership, changes to Breeze, major changes. Then you go down in the following pages to legislation sponsored by the board, and then regulations. And then out of all of that, you will cover the first few items here leading up to legislation sponsored by the board. It's just, I think it could be organized a little better. I mean, it just needs I mean, maybe if you're just going to have editorial staff go over it, that would address it.
Thank you for that comment. We'll take that into consideration.
That's
As
fine.
long as the information is correct,
Yeah,
we'll see how,
it is.
yeah, we'll see how the organization, does anybody have any particular questions about what essentially we reported about portfolio, the fact that we had an audit of our finances? All these other things are pretty self-explanatory. At the bottom of page 47, we'll add essentially that not only did we complete the pediatric anesthesia report, but that we also submitted it to Senator Hill by December of 2016. Unless you see anything that's, unusual, we can move on.
Karen?
Yes.
I in fact had the same issue, that I felt that this was not organized in a way that it addressed the questions in the order that they were there. And there were a couple of places where I felt, because I tried to read this two ways. The first was for members who were not here when we did the last sunset. And the second is the changing nature of the legislature and the fact that there may not be the same committee members who will see this. And so there were some things like in talking about Breeze, and when it was implemented when we did the fee increase, and about when the fees were approved and the new schedules went in, that when fees were actually increased. And I thought that that needed some expansion so that people understand what the whole story was here.
Okay, so what bullet are you referring to?
This is, it starts at the bottom of page 46.
Mm-hmm.
And then it actually, if you take the next two bullets on page 47, I felt like the bottom of page 46 needed to be expanded when we talk about converting to the Department of Consumer Affairs new online licensing and enforcement Breeze system, to talk about whether there were any issues associated with that. And again, with the next bullet, in working with OPES, if there were any problems.
Okay. So noted. Any other comments about this section? That brings us into the legislation sponsored by the board, and then the legislation affecting the board since last sunset review. Does anybody have anything marked in that section that needs further clarification?
Is this the same? On page 60, the section on the dental board review of the dental profession, is that the same section?
Page 60?
Mm-hmm. Or is that a?
No, that's, we're still
Okay.
on section, we're still on section 1. So page 60?
Yeah.
What section did you want to look
Number
at?
5, and this kind of goes back to something that the president brought up earlier. And this is the section where it talks about national organizations. And in the first one, we talk about the American Association of Dental Boards.
Mm-hmm.
And my question was, in the later section, should we seek authority to either have permission to attend meetings so that we do have voting privileges? And I believe that's what you brought up earlier.
Yes.
And if it is, if we agree that it is, this might be a good time to ask that question through this mechanism.
Okay, we always, so at a certain time of the year, we have to put in our travel plans, out-of-state travel plans, and we always submit this as a meeting that the board would like to attend, and it always gets denied. Because there are very strict criteria, mission critical criteria that would have to fit. Now, we probably all agree that it's important for the board to stay in contact with what other state organizations are doing. So we will have to figure out a way how best to present this in a way that somehow we bring it around to mission critical. Mission critical typically is identified as enforcement issues or examination issues. Sarah, if you want to jump in at any point.
Can I add something? Because the opioid crisis is an example of something that is critical to this country, critical to the citizens of California, and those issues are being discussed and materials being presented at those meetings related to that, and we're not at those meetings. So I think that we need to have someone there to represent us and to take back information to share with this board. So those are the kinds of issues that I think it's reasonable to get on board with what Ms. Burton was suggesting, be more proactive in telling the governor that this is an important meeting and we want to be there.
Okay, so we will expand this, the answer to this question. Does the board membership include voting privileges for national associations? We'll expand the discussion on that.
Hey, through the chair, Dr. Lay, we do have voting privileges at REB, don't we?
I'm sorry?
Do we have voting privileges at REB?
What do you mean by that?
Yes.
I know, okay, the answer was yes.
Yes,
yeah.
we're a member, we're a voting member of REB, but the AADB, we pay dues to the AADB. So whether or not we have voting privileges, I suppose would depend on whether we're at the meeting. So we'll look into that a little further and try to come up with additional information to see how we can emphasize that the board feels that's important and how we can get people to attend these meetings in the future.
I have a question. If we are members of the American Association of Dental Boards, California is, does that mean that individual members of the dental board can attend those meetings?
No. And it's having the membership is one thing, having the individual peoples go is a different thing.
So I don't mean have the state pay for my
Right.
expenses to go. I'm saying, can I as an individual go?
Right.
Because I am also a member individually of the American Association of Dental Boards.
Right.
And I attend those meetings as a member,
And-
individual
and
member,
we get the
not as a
benefit-
board member.
And we get the benefit of you being able to report
And
back
I
what
belonged to
happens.
that organization before I was a board
Right.
member. So I
Right.
can still attend. Do I need your permission to attend?
No. Not as an individual.
Okay.
I'd give it to you if you asked.
I appreciate that.
We went through this this year already.
Okay, so I think I got the idea. We'll work on this section. It looks like the board really wants to try to actively pursue how we can get to these meetings, and we'll see how we can build that into the report to get that message across. So it looks like nobody had any questions or concerns about the legislation or the regulations. I might add that these regulation update, essentially you get at your quarterly meetings, essentially where we are with certain reg packages. I'm also happy to report that we've recently hired 2 legislative regulatory analysts, very enthusiastic people, and we're looking forward to them getting acclimated to the regulatory process and moving some of our regulations along that have been stalled for a while. So we had jumped to page 60 to address Ms. Burton's comment about the voting privileges. Is there anything else on that particular page that anybody has an issue with? We're on page 60. On page 61, we've got some changes. What happened was we had a group of folks go through what we submitted last 4 years ago. And it looks like at that time, we actually had the enforcement chief and the board president attend this prescription opioid misuse and overdose work group. That was on page 61. So that last sentence will be coming out. The Medical Board of California Prescribing Task Force will be coming out. And the bullet on executive officers meeting, we at the current time do not meet quarterly to discuss issues among ourselves, so that will be coming out.
I have one question. So going back to 51, the application for ADEX. So previously, we were going to accept only one model of ADEX.
Mm-hmm.
So if that clears and they try to present where we can take a different version, would that have to go through another process?
The administration of the ADEX exam will be determined by the board in regulation. Yep.
Even though we're actually going towards one model?
But and
Because
think
if it's
I
going to be
briefly-
based against, it'd be similar to portfolio.
Right.
Then if they're going to give another version, do we have to look at that version before that passes?
well, so ADEX, if the ADEX gets through the process of being essentially accepted by California, and the board determines that the administration of the ADEX exam, that candidates had to have gone through a portfolio type model of the ADEX, they'd be eligible for licensure in California. ADEX mentioned, Dr. Champagne mentioned today that ADEX is moving toward that type of administration themselves. So they may at some point not have what's considered the traditional way of regional testing. And we will probably be asking ADEX to come and give a presentation about how things have changed since they last spoke to the board. But the board's authority still will exist to determine what method of administration of the ADEX exam you're willing to accept. Okay, does that answer your question? Okay, we're back on page 6.
On the ADEX exam, just for information, ADEX, first of all, ADEX doesn't give the exam. The regional examining boards give the exam.
Right.
Regional examining boards that give the ADEX exam have been contacting the dental schools in California, requesting the use of those schools for the administration of the examination. At this point in time, I'm not aware of any school that has entered into a contract or an agreement with ADEX, with the regional examining boards to accomplish that. However, conversation today would indicate that the examinations that will be given in dental schools all around the country, not just California, but all around the country, will be the curriculum integrated type of the clinical component of the examination.
Right.
The ADEX exam has a mannequin section, a computerized written section, and then also the patient-based clinical section. That clinical section is the one that is in question from a standpoint of how that is as far as patient care is concerned. And so the indication was that it would be universally a curriculum integrated type of a clinical exam. So.
Right, and I found that out today too, and so we've asked that Dr. Champagne come back at a future meeting to explain what's happening.
Great.
To give the board the current information. Okay, we're pretty well done with section 1. Unless anybody has any questions or concern, we can go on to section 2, which is on page 63. Jerry, did you pass out some changes? So when this went out to you, we were looking at it, and there are a lot of things that weren't correct. And we're passing out another version only so that you can see essentially what the real numbers were for the statistics on the survey. So Jerry's passing that information out now. It goes through and says essentially where one would find our performance measures on the website, and the performance measures will be actually a part of our attachments that will be included that go to the legislature. You have seen the performance measures quarterly. They're the ones with all the colored charts that come from the department. So those have been in your packets quarterly, so none of this should be a surprise. So we've gone through and essentially given the legislature the same type of update we give the board on a quarterly basis as in terms of our intake, our investigation target dates, formal discipline, and probation target dates. What I wanted you to take a look at essentially was this survey. So at the completion of an investigation, we ask the people who filed the complaint to fill out a questionnaire either online or a postcard. And this gives you an opportunity over the last 4 years to see what the responses are. Now, it's interesting because when I went before the legislature for an audit report, the chair of the committee was very gracious, and he said, well, if your numbers are low, that means everybody must be happy. And I said, I like the way you're thinking. Because while we don't have a high response rate, at least it's not significant. It has no, statistically, the response rate is so low, it doesn't have a significance, if you will. But we still can look at this and see that people aren't happy. And this is our gauge to try to do things better. Now, what we could do better is, of course, try to bring down our processing time. If the person filing the complaint, if the final decision didn't go the way they had hoped, then they're not happy. We rarely get people who actually had a good experience say they had a good experience. And I'll be the first to say, when I have a good experience, I do not fill out a questionnaire. I should, I think about it. And I don't fill out a questionnaire that says awesome experience. So we can just take this for what it is. We are looking at, staff is looking at this on a regular basis. We are constantly trying to improve our communication with people who file complaints, with walking them through the process. As we've spoken before, many of the complaints just want their money back, which we don't have the authority to do. And so, you know, I don't know that, I'm hoping we'll be able to bring the customer satisfaction up, and we'll work toward trying to do that. We monitor our units in terms of whether our employees are pleasant on the phone, whether they're returning phone calls quickly. I haven't heard any complaints recently about people not being able to get through to the board, so hopefully that has improved. So we're seeing our improvements slowly, which we hope will continue. And that pretty much is section 2. So yay, we're done with 2 sections unless somebody has a question. Did you have a question?
Before you go on, this is kind of relative because none of the numbers are high, but I noticed that the department's average number was higher than ours.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question I had was whether their surveys are different from ours and whether you've done that kind of comparison.
I don't
Do
believe
they
the
ask
surveys
that
are
question
different.
that are
I think
different?
all the surveys are the same.
Okay, okay. And then the part 2 of that is part of this that the survey is too long?
It's only 8 questions. I don't know. Do you think 8 questions is, it came down, it used to be 12, 13, 15 questions. So, I mean, it came down, but.
Karen, I have a question. I think it's been a couple of years that some of our stakeholders were complaining about just our telephone service. They couldn't get through to a live body, or and so I would be interested if there's anybody in the audience. I think CDA gets some of those calls. We might not, but CDA does, and it would be helpful to hear if there's been a perceptible change in that level of service. I'm hoping the answer is yes, but I would like to hear that.
Well, before Mary jumps in, I'll say, usually if they get the call, we get the call from Mary, and we haven't gotten the call from Mary, so I'm gonna guess she's gonna say, hopefully the complaints have gone down.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay.
It was that easy, Mary? All right, it works for me.
We made her get up to do that. Okay, we're on to section 3, which is a little more technical, and this deals with our fiscal issues. Basically, again, we've gone through your budget reports every quarter. There are no surprises here. Part of the, and I don't know how much, Sarah, the delay in the Fiscal numbers are going to have on this section. So I'll give Sarah that that part to respond to. I'll just say that you know that the Department of Consumer Affairs, as was most of the other agencies in the state, required to turn over into a new accounting program, procurement program called Fiscal. The department has found it very challenging to do so. We have recently been told that it just doesn't affect the dental board, it affects all boards and bureaus, and we won't likely get our closeout for this last fiscal year until March of 2019. Now, that doesn't mean they're not on top of it. It just means, and I'll turn it over at this point to Sarah to explain how that affects us and to try to allay any fears you may have about this.
So we are in constant communication with the DCA Budget Office. They have been wonderful to work with through this entire process, and they are quick to get us as much information as possible. But with that knowledge in mind, we're consistently monitoring our fund, and I'll preface this with pending no legislative changes or lawsuits or anything else crazy going on. Right now, our fund is fiscally solvent, and we are looking good. That could all change next week. But as of the date we wrote the report, we're good. So we are still looking at our normal reversion that we have, so we have sufficient funds in reserve, so we are okay. For the majority of Section 3, we've been able to complete it in its entirety with the exception of Table 4A, starting on page 76. The legislature had asked for fiscal information going through year 17-18, which just closed out and, well, ended in June of this year. While we don't have the end of the year final numbers from Fiscal, Budget's office has done a pretty good job of being able to pull information from various sources to give us a pretty good idea of where we are. So short of completing Table 4A, which generates how much revenue was came in broken out by each individual fee type, we have a completed Section 3. So what we're going to do is, in working with Budget Office, I think towards the end of August, maybe going into September, there's a couple of other resources we can pull from. So we will have the column for 17-18 revenue completed, and then we'll finish out the percentage of total revenue. If for some reason something happens and we can't make that happen, we'll calculate it based off the 16-17, and we'll work with the Budget Office on an explanation as to why that has occurred. But as of right now, I believe we'll be able to have this completed by our October meeting.
Does anybody have any questions about Section 3?
Yes.
I do.
Okay, so Fran, and then Yvette, and then
On page 74, and we have already had this discussion, sort of, kind of, you and I, about, we talk about Breeze, we talk about Release 2, we talk about legacy systems, and anybody who picks this up that has no idea what Release 2 is or what the legacy system is, can we somewhere establish more definitively what that is before we just jump in and start using those terms?
yes. So noted.
And again, on number 13, we talk about the costs incurred by both funds include vendor costs, the DCA stat, and other related costs. Is there any way that we can explain that further?
We will work with Budget Office.
Okay. And then below the chart, we talk about going from the project phase into the maintenance phase. And I would have that same comment. What does that mean? And in that maintenance phase, will there be any changes, any increase in cost? I don't know the answer to that looking at this.
And we won't know the answer to that.
Okay. On the next page, the third paragraph where we talk about the dentistry fund and the whole discussion about fees and what the fees were for 16 years, and then we went to the fee increase to the statutory cap. We don't really say why. In the next paragraph about CPEI, what is that? What is CPEI?
Oh, my
And
goodness.
actually, later on, you talk about it when we get in the later section. But again, for somebody who is reading this and reading this through for the first time, what is that and what caused the need for those positions?
Okay.
And was that in
Of course, the board,
13 or 14?
the board knows all the answers to these questions. We just need to make sure the legislature understands.
Well, but new members, do you know the answer to that question? Tell me what CPEI is.
Oh.
I dare you. And again, that's how I tried to read it. I tried to read it like I'm new to this board, and I have a lot of sympathy with that because new members, I will tell you, after my first meeting, I went home thinking, what was I thinking? I have no idea what these people are talking about. I mean, it was just so much to try to gather at one time. And so going forward, I try to keep thinking like that. I don't know, so I'm going to read this like I don't know and see if that answers my question. And it didn't. So that's the reason that I bring it up.
So the quick answer to that is CPEI stands for Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative. It came about, I'm going to guess, 2011. The department did a department-wide budget change proposal to add enforcement staff to boards and bureaus to try to bring the numbers down for how long it takes to process a complaint from start to finish. That's it in a nutshell. So we'll make sure that the legislature understands that. Okay? That's where we got essentially the performance measures to have our complaints completed within a certain time frame. And in order to meet that time frame, this Consumer Protection Initiative, Enforcement Initiative came about to hopefully remedy that problem. So we'll go ahead and make sure that that's clear.
And I think the most important thing is that it happened, but the money didn't come right along with it. To fund our positions didn't come right along
Right, and
with
that
it.
was primarily discussed in the last sunset report, so there may be sections of that that would be helpful to repeat in this report. Are there any other comments, Ms. Burton?
I did
let-
have one,
wait,
but.
Wait, let's make sure Fran's done first, and then we'll go to you. Fran, are you done with that section? Okay.
Okay. I saw her turn off her light.
Oh.
We were just talking about this new system, and we will not have, it will not be completed until, or possibly completed until March of next year. Will we be able to, how will our budget be approved if the system, I guess I'm not understanding this March date and how we submit our budget and how it's approved and So if you can just explain that.
So the Fiscal system is a statewide issue. It's not unique to the DCA entities. So this is a statewide issue. So in preparation for our budget, we typically work with the Department of Consumer Affairs on workload and revenue projections. So we will most likely work with Budget Office utilizing our workload statistics that we can generate as a result of our licensure statistics. All of our revenue is generated based on the licensure fees that we assess. So there's other options. So I think knowing what our history has been and being able to utilize that information combined with the annual statistics to close out that we do have available, I feel confident that we're going to be able to put together a pretty solid budget projection for 1920.
But you just talked about the income side, and Bree also talked about the expense side
Correct.
as well. And how is this new system going to impact?
We should be fine. So
Okay.
the way that our budget is established is typically the governor's budget and Department of Finance and Department of Consumer Affairs takes I think it's a 2% or a 2.5% increase, annual increase over time, just for cost of doing business. So then we would also make changes based on if we need to submit a budget change proposal. But again, we're working closely with the budget office in determining whether or not those expenditures can be supported by our revenue. And they have the ability to generate the estimates for the expenses, and we have the ability to generate our projections for our revenue and making sure that they're balancing out.
Okay. In that, we were just talking about being a part of all of these other organizations as well, and the voting power, if in fact we can vote. I know that Karen said that we were turned down on a lot of it. Is there a possibility? But I know you've worked every angle, but I'm just going to ask a question anyway. That when submitting, if in fact we can stress the importance of being at the table, because it helps us do our job better, being at the table, and perhaps there's someplace else that we can sacrifice. I don't know, but being at the table is extremely important.
Yes, that's all included.
Yeah, I agree with Fran that when we use abbreviations, maybe spell it out one time and follow it with the abbreviation, and then you can use the abbreviation through the rest of the document. And then when you cite a regulation, I don't know what the best place to put it is. Do you put it at the beginning or the end, or do you footnote? But if it was consistently done throughout the document the same way, might make it a little easier reading. And then just another general comment. I see a lot of qualitative kind of terms, like we say the fund is solvent and there's a healthy annual reserve. Well, I was always taught quantify things. What is your months of reserve? What is your optimal? And just, what's your balance? Rather than saying healthy, maybe give more specifics. This is just wordsmithing really, but I thought I'd bring it up.
I agree with you. And especially, one of the things I said after I started too is that we really need a glossary. There's something that we need here because we're making assumptions. I am very sympathetic toward staff. I'm very sympathetic because you're doing a lot of work. One more thing is my heart goes out to you because boards do that to me. But if in fact that will make your job easier, even if we had someone to be able to do that, heck, I'll volunteer. But if we had a glossary,
Did you get that?
honestly, I will. What did I do?
You're gonna put the glossary.
Well, I need a team. come on, come with me.
No, the first year I had to do by myself.
But a glossary that will help us so that we're not going to, like, what is the difference between reprimand and approval? Come on, we use that simultaneously, or is that something different? When we're reading these cases, we really need to know. And I was 2 years down the line, down the road before I knew about stipulated settlements. I was faking it. But I read 3 times, but that didn't affect my decision. It did not affect my decision. I read things 2 or 3 times sometimes, but I think that it will help going in so that it wouldn't be so tough. And sometimes we forget. Sometimes we really do forget. And sometimes we don't want to say, oh, I really didn't know that, until a new member comes in and asks the questions, and we say, well, I'm glad they asked that question because I sure didn't know, or I thought I knew. So some kind of glossary that will make it easier. I'll volunteer with the team. Thank you.
Just one comment, Karen, if I can, sort of bridging 13 and 14 before we go on. The amount of money that we have had expended for Breeze, close to $3 million, and then 14 is, somewhat justifying the need to increase fees and so forth, and we're looking for clarification of acronyms. Consider changing Breeze to Hurricane.
Any more comments about the fiscal section 3? Thanks for all your comments. I was yelling. We've made a significant number of changes already to section number 4. And so I just want to let you know that when we skip to the denials, this is a new question when they ask for how many licenses have we denied and what were the reasons, because the legislation that has come about in the last 4 years actually has made it more difficult for boards to deny a license based on past criminal activity. And so currently on the books is essentially a statute that says if somebody has a conviction that's actually been expunged, where they've gone back to the court and had it expunged, that cannot be considered in the licensure process. So this is a new section for us to fill out. You can see that we've only denied 1 dental license. We do have issues with the RDAs, and we lovingly say they have behavior problems, the RDAs. What we've done with this chart that we've incorporated here is actually taken this and put it into a narrative. So there'll be I think 24 total narrative paragraphs that we've switched out. We've taken these very dry violations, if you will, and turned it into a paragraph to say why we denied the license. Just so there were 22 RDAs, 1 dentist, and 1, I believe, permit that was denied. So that will be different in the next version that you'll be seeing. Now the statutes that are out there affect all boards and bureaus, and those of us working for healing arts boards believe that prior convictions do make a difference when you're dealing with public safety and public health and those types of things, as opposed to whether or not you're trying to get a contractor's license or do something not health related. So we still, our staff is making an effort to really review on a case-by-case basis the applications that come in. Just to remind you, if a license is denied, candidates do have the ability to go to the Attorney General's office and have a hearing and present their information to administrative law judge. And then that decision will come back to the board, and the board can decide whether or not they agree with issuing a license unrestricted, a probationary license, or upholding a denial. So you'll still be active in this process. And so this is what we're reporting new in the report. Sarah, did you have licensing numbers that you wanted to pass out? Jerry, did you have? So we'll just give you the updated licensing numbers we have here. Now and thank you for being patient with us, because we were having trouble with the tables. We were filling in templates, and the tables don't translate and insert very well into the document. And one of my pet peeves is when your chart is cut off, that the headings don't follow the next part, so it's very difficult. All these things are going to be corrected and going to be pretty next time around. But Sarah, in putting together the licensing statistics, we've had a heck of a time getting what we believe to be accurate numbers out of Breeze. And sometimes we don't know they're inaccurate until we go through every number and say, that doesn't quite look right, or why is that different? So it is really a labor-intensive process to go through just to make sure our data is accurate. Remember, we've only been on Breeze for 2 years. When we transitioned over, the transition was relatively smooth, but Breeze is a constant in terms of daily. We're finding things that need to be tweaked, and trying to stay on top of anomalies we're finding in it. It's almost as if we're doing things manually to make sure that we're reporting what's accurate in the computer system. Sarah, did you want to take it over and walk through anything in particular?
What you've just received are amended statistics for Table 6, Table 7A, and Table 7B. As Karen mentioned, the tables that came over with the report template have been very challenging. And so at this point, we have not been able to carry over the table headings into the next pages. So note that I am working with DCA. They're going to, their Office of Publication Design and Editing is going to help us in putting this together to make it a much more aesthetically pleasing report. But essentially what you have in your packets was a result of pulling data from 2 separate sources. We've been working very closely with the Office of Information Services. This Sunset Review includes data that was collected from our legacy system, or what was known as our applicant tracking system and our consumer affairs system. Those were the antiquated systems that were replaced with Breeze, and then also data from Breeze. And so that conversion has affected the way that we've gathered our statistics. So we have run the statistical report probably no less than 20 times and have met equally as much. So what you have in front of you is what I feel confident is a pretty
Solid.
What?
Solid.
Pretty solid statistical analysis of what they've requested. Some of the information is not available for some fiscal years. When you look at Table 7A, they're really drilling down into applications that were received, approved, closed, issued, what were within the board's control, what were outside of the board's control. You're talking about 2 different systems at 2 separate times, and both measured things differently. And so CAS and ATS didn't give us that ability to really drill down to that. So Breeze does now. So you'll see that on this last fiscal year. Within the last year, we've really had that ability to monitor what our, we call them application milestones essentially, and what our time tracking is in order to complete applications. You're going to see, and I don't know if you want me to walk you through everything. It's pretty long, but what we've done is we've sat down with the 2014 report, Sunset Review report, and compared all of these license types to the 2014 report to make sure that the trends seem to continue. You'll see anomalies like there's an RDA page here. I wanted to point this out.
12, page 12.
Is it on page 12?
51,000?
Yes. So on page 12, thank you. So on page 12, you will see under RDA pending applications total at close of fiscal year. For RDAs, there were 51,309 open applications. Then it dropped to 19,792 applications, then to 17,676 applications, and then to 508. That is true. And let me tell you why. So when we converted over, CAS, the way that the RDA applications had been run, we had 52,000 applications that had been open for years because applicants hadn't met the requirements, people gave up, applications hadn't been abandoned. Over the last 2 years, Tina Valerie has gone through every single file in the dental assisting file room and has abandoned applications and has updated the records, so everything in Breeze is correct. That is for the RDAs, the RDAEFs, the OAs, and the DSAs. So we now have 508 open applications. So we have a more accurate reflection of how many applications we have open at any given time.
Huge effort.
Yes.
And she got a promotion for that, so. I don't know whether that's punishment
It's the
or-
most pristine file room you have ever seen. Nobody's allowed to touch anything.
And we're trying to clone her. We're actually trying to clone her, and
Yes.
it's not working so good.
So
yeah.
you'll also see on the last fiscal year, 17-18, when you're going through each of these licenses, you'll see pending applications outside the board's control and within the board's control. When you get to, OA or even DDS, it looks like there's 302 pending applications outside the board's control and 193 within the board's control. That's not indicative of a backlog. I just wanted to point that out. That is because we're at the close of fiscal year, so that's the cutoff as of June 30th. You're also dealing with May and June, we received the majority of our applications because everybody's graduated. Same thing for the RDA, the EF, the OA, and DSA. At any given time, we have hundreds upon hundreds of applications processing. Our application processing timeline is within 4 to 6 weeks. That's for a deficient application where we still need additional information from the applicant. So we don't have any backlogs in licensing. It's just when the timing when the report's pulled creates that.
Sarah, just a comment on table 6. I think it's great information, and I like the way you have it laid out. One observation, column 1 under licensing type, there's also permits in there, so would you consider licensing/permits for that column? And second comment would be, and maybe this is just a preference that I have, if you could put the column heading at the top of each page.
Right.
Because when we go from page 1 to page 5, I've forgotten what the columns are, but, just a formatting.
And that's publication design and editing is going to help us with that. We tried to do this with this, and it was an absolute disaster because of it's in a template format that we didn't create. So when we send it over to publication design and editing, the final report will have the column headings on the beginning of each page.
Is there value, and I'm thinking ahead for this, is there value of tracking what permits or licenses were voluntarily surrendered, or the ones that were retired, decided not to review, or the ones that converted from, let's say, active to inactive or to retired, so we can see an outflow of the licenses too? Is there a value in doing that? we want to see the exit as well as the entry. Do we?
So what we're providing here is what has been asked of us by the legislature in their templates.
Okay.
Can we provide that information? Yes. I don't know that it would necessarily be beneficial because I think the numbers are so small that I don't think it would show any significant trend.
Okay.
But we could provide that to the board on a quarterly basis. I mean, we have the ability to run certain reports and ask for specific information. We've wrestled with this idea of surrendering a license and giving up a license or no longer interested. I'm not sure we've clarified that yet in our titles of our licenses.
No, our statutes are a little bit different, so.
I understand where this is because of the sunset review, but trend analysis can be really revealing if we ask the right questions in there. And it may be just a one time that we ask the question just to see in the last 5 years, is there a trend doing it that way?
I agree, and what we've been working on is the licensing managers have been meeting with OIS to try to build basically a program that will generate those types of reports so that we have quick and easy access to that to be able to provide to the board at meetings and then for us to be able to analyze on a monthly basis.
Before you leave that section, on number 18, the question about performance targets and expectations for licensing, there is a discussion about keeping track of pending applications
What page
and
are you on?
renewal applications.
What page are you on?
Page 83, number 18. So keeping track of new applications and pending renewal applications. And I'm not, can you say that last sentence in a different way? I don't know what that means.
The last sentence of the first paragraph under 18?
Right, for renewal applicant.
It, in my version, has been deleted. So
Beg your pardon?
delete it. Delete the last sentence.
Okay, okay,
In my version, that's deleted.
okay,
Okay?
all right. And then on the next page, I find it kind of confusing under 19, when you're talking about the volume of applications. This is the second paragraph under 19. And you talk about the growth, but then how there have been decreases because of something. Number of active dental licenses have decreased by 2.69, with a similar decrease of 9.4 for active RDA licenses. And then you talk about the greatest growth. It's the way that's put together is very confusing.
Okay, we'll work on that. Are there any other comments in section 4?
The delinquent applications in the next paragraph that you attribute to, I think you're attributing this to perhaps people who are no longer practicing. Am I reading that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you know that?
We're speculating.
Beg your pardon?
We're speculating.
Okay. And so, and that was kind of my question, what's the evidence?
Just offering up what could be a reason. I don't know that we'll know.
Okay.
Dr. Chin?
My question goes back to page 86, and I know I'm opening up this conundrum, but we've had some disciplinary cases where possession of marijuana or substance abuse of marijuana. Now that it's legal, do we open the box by asking the question, what do we do now? Now that it was illegal at the time, we denied the license because they didn't disclose it, and yet now it's legal. What do we do? And then the other piece of the puzzle is that as a controlled substance, marijuana is a federally controlled substance. How do we deal with that?
Well, if the conviction has to do with impairment because of the use, that's one thing you look at.
Okay.
If it's possession, we'll have to see how that plays out. I don't know how to answer that question.
It's ex post facto. It was
Right.
illegal then and it's legal now.
Possession.
Yeah, what do we do?
Right.
And then, did you violate federal law with a controlled substance? And yet does that superimpose state law?
Yeah. I think.
And how do we handle it as a board?
I don't know that you necessarily make a policy statement. I think that we take these issues on a case-by-case
Okay.
basis.
Okay.
I don't think, I think it's too complicated and there's too many assumptions you would have to make. So I think that going into this, we're still taking the view that if you're impaired because you are smoking marijuana, the fact that you're smoking isn't illegal, but if you're impaired is the illegal part. Like alcohol, right?
Well, it's also about the dispensing. There are dispensing in terms of using it as a pre-medication before they come to see you.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's going to be, I mean, the whole Cannabis Bureau is evolving, and I'm sure that there are paths that hard decisions are going to have to be made as we go down that path, and we'll be watching.
Okay.
We'll be
Had to just put it on the
diligent
table.
about it. But I'm going to write your name down as volunteering
Oh,
to
yeah.
help. Sarah, make sure Dr. Chan is willing to be involved in this issue.
I know nothing.
Dr. Witcher?
Just an organizational thing.
Mike.
Mike, please.
Number 18, it talks about performance targets and expectations for the licensing program. Then it kind of digresses into this discussion about milestones implemented into Release 2 of Breeze and goes on about that. And I think if you just maybe move that paragraph down and start it off with the third paragraph, as stated in regulation, the issue of license should be completed within 90 days of receipt of a completed application. It kind of segues into a discussion of licensing timelines, which is what this is about. So I think it needs to be reorganized so it reads a little better. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, it kind of takes you on a digression before it gets into actually answering the question. And I see that in a lot of these. Just, the the questions are pretty straightforward, and sometimes there isn't really a direct answer.
Okay. Yeah, if, oh my gosh. Yeah, I did. Note that Dr. Witcher just said he would rewrite this report. Okay. Can you let us know when you're going to have that done?
When would you like it?
Tomorrow? Okay, so where are we with section 4? Any more comments on section 4?
Also include page 109, no? Yes. Under D, 22D, and the discussion about the national data bank as a way to, as a clearinghouse, how does the board check for malpractice claims otherwise? I think the answer may be further back in the the last new issues system section, I think. But otherwise, how do you check for malpractice claims? And the reason I'm asking that is because in the later section, you talk about the practitioner's obligation to report.
The National Practitioner Data Bank is a data bank recording discipline. It's not, it may or may not give us information on malpractice. We have a section of code, B&P section 800-805, that requires insurance companies to notify the board of at a certain threshold to notify us whether claims have been made. So this section is essentially relating to how are we tracking whether people who are asking for a license in California, have they had discipline in another state?
Okay.
So because somebody has essentially been awarded a malpractice doesn't necessarily mean they were disciplined in another state.
Okay.
Does that help answer your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay, we're still in section 4, licensing. You'll see on page 113, the bottom table does not have anything in it. It should say not applicable, and so we'll there won't be anything in there, and we'll correct that to say not applicable.
And would you go back to page 112? I was happy to see this number because I remember when we had this legislation where we were asked to waive fees. This is
Military licenses?
Yes.
Are you talking about military license?
Licenses. So I was surprised to see this number that we are actually tracking 319 persons. Is there any breakdown between, because I think the way the question was asked in the legislation was that we would track people who were current or people who had served. So is there any identification, is there any breakdown that answers that question or no?
The requirement is actually to waive the fees. It's not necessarily to track. There's a requirement to expedite the application process for somebody who's in military, expedite the applications for a spouse of a military, and to waive renewal fees. And so the way our system is set up right now, we will expedite applications for members of the military or their spouses. We don't have a mechanism in Breeze to be able to track that. We are going to begin tracking the correspondence that we receive, but it's very low. Mm-hmm. And then what you're seeing in here, the waivers are tracked by modifiers that are built in Breeze. So there is a mechanism to track it in Breeze. We've had to add that because there was confusion within the military apparently as to if it's waived, does that mean they still have an active license? So we've clarified that, and that's allowed us to produce the statistics that you see in the report.
I have to say that this 319 number is higher than I thought it was going to be. When we were first asked about this, I thought it was going to be very minimal. So this is nice to see, this statistic in another way.
So on the 112 on A, is there a distinction, and I think the answer is yes, but it's not specified here, applicants who are currently active military or reserve versus ones who have been separated as veterans?
And that's the question.
Yeah.
The department has put, and Tina, if you're out there, the department put in a questionnaire into the renewals that are generated. Can you speak to that? So with each renewal, it does ask if they have served in the military, and if they have, then staff puts a modifier on their license. I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but the question is for those that have actually applied for the waiver, which is a different process. But as far as travel that responded to that, do we have any way to pull that together? Anybody, yeah, anybody who has the modifier in Breeze as far as the military waiver, we should definitely be able to pull that information.
Just to clarify what BNP section 114.5 says, each board shall inquire in every application for licensure if the individual applying for licensure is serving in or has previously served in the military.
Previously served?
Mhm.
That could go on to World War II, yes.
Yes.
Holy crap. Sorry.
Have you answered the question?
I think we opened the question.
Are we good?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I just renewed my license on online, and I did serve in the military. That was in the 1960s. Do I get a waiver for something? No.
We'll put you on the list.
Technically, yes.
Okay, almost through with section 4. Any more comments or questions?
Hello, yeah, on page 115 where it says registered dental assistants, I don't see a clear explanation why the practical exam was removed. I personally don't even know why it was removed, so I wonder if legislators might want a little bit better explanation on this.
We have a number of explanations that are occurring
can
in the
put
other
in?
sections,
Oh,
and it's repeated again and again. And so if at the end of reviewing this, you still have questions, let's
I was
revisit
looking
that.
for it.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, there are a number of places where we talked about what happened with the practical exam and why it was removed and the effort we made to go through that process. It was, I think it's mentioned at least twice, if not more, in the report as we go further. Okay, so it's going to be repeated in different sections.
It's on page 58 in section 1, under the Dental Board of California review of the RDA practical examination in April 2017.
So that's the first time. I know it's going to be mentioned again in section 10, and it's going to probably be mentioned again in new issues that need further resolve. So there'll be 2 more times where it's mentioned. So Dr. Chan and then Dr. Witcher.
So this may be a question through the chair to Fran. When they go through, they meaning BNP goes through this, do they have it parceled out where you have different legislative aides taking different pieces in there?
No.
No? So they have one person go through the whole thing. And the question that, or the remark that might come up is to answer Dr. Laren's question is to footnote it. You have one footnote, it's on the bottom.
Thank you. We'll take that into consideration. We haven't been told yet. The last sunset review, the assembly side took the board. Previous to that, the Senate side had taken the board. Oftentimes, the consultants we're working with are pretty familiar with what we do, thankfully. So we haven't been notified yet which side is going to be taking. It was just the last 4 years that the assembly took a more active role in the oversight process, and so they've sort of divided things up. So we'll see where it falls. But staff will be working closely with the consultant assigned to us. They, as soon as they receive our report, I'm sure they already have some idea the questions they're going to be asking and the sections they're going to be looking at. But we work closely with the legislative staff to give them as much information up front so that they don't have to identify certain issues that still need to be addressed or resolved. Okay. Dr. Witcher?
Yeah, not to harp on this, but the section on the RDA practical, It's kind of repetitious. In fact, it's mentioned, I think, 10 times in the document.
Yeah, we
And
want to make sure they know that we need to, that needs to be taken out. So if you think it's too much, the board can vote on that and decide.
well, just look at it, and because it got to where I kind of, do I have to read this again? Because it's kind of tedious reading. But again, I'm in there. You know, this is something that I worked on as a member of a subcommittee. So I guess I'm, you know, ready to move on. But anyway.
So I guess my question is, do you think we've gotten the point across?
Oh yeah.
Okay, well then, we've been successful. So the question is, should we pare it back? I don't know, I think it's significant to discuss it in the sections that we're answering the questions to, and I'm sorry that it was tedious, because it was tedious to have to write it. Yeah, well, you sometimes.
So I can't resist. Page 119, item 31. Do we send 5 schools a notice that we have not formally approved you yet?
No. No.
Thank you.
That was supposed to be an inside joke, I think, but everybody's maybe in the coma. Is it time to take a little maybe bathroom break and then come back and try to see how far we can get through in about so if you take a 10-minute break, come back at 4, and we'll power through till 4:30, and then I promise we'll stop, and whatever we don't finish today, we will have to take up tomorrow. And does that work for everybody? Okay, 10 minutes.
And work our way towards our seats. We'll get going again for the last session.
We're going to try to move ahead for the next 25 minutes and see how much we can get done so that tomorrow we will have less to do. We also potentially, we know Dr. Lay will not be here tomorrow, and there's a chance that Ms. McKenzie won't be here tomorrow, so we'll try to get through as much as we can today with regard to this report. So are there any more questions regarding section 4, licensing section? Okay. We're going to go to section 5 now, which is the enforcement section. And that starts on page 124. Now, we're going to work on cleaning this up. So I had a lot of questions myself, and I want to direct your attention to some of the statistics that stood out that Carlos and I worked on to at least have an explanation of what they mean. So I'm particularly looking at page 125. As you're looking at the source of complaint, which is at the top of the page, what does other entail? And if you'll notice, we're only recording 3 fiscal years. So the other, because there are, you know, the numbers are a good size, 392, 529, 407. The other refers to unknown complaints received, anonymous complaints received. That's what some examples of other could be.
What would an unknown, what does that mean, unknown?
Carlos, can you respond to the difference between an unknown and an anonymous?
Hi, Carlos Alvarez, Enforcement Chief. Some of the complaints that come in, they write in anonymous, and there is times that they say, I'm anonymous, and sometimes they add their name or they add an email and said, please, you could please contact me, but we'll keep the source anonymous. And then there is some complaints that come in just unknown, and it's just a complaint. There's no name, no contact, no type of information on it. And so at that time, it's entered as unknown because we have nobody to contact at all. So sometimes anonymous, it'll come in anonymous, but at least there's a contact with an email or a telephone number saying, please contact me if you need further information.
This section also refers to if we receive a report on the news that one of our dentists who's licensed in California has had something happen in another state, we open a complaint internally to start to follow that. So that's what these numbers mean. As you go down here, you can see essentially we have license denial, we have accusation. So these are enforcement statistics. Was there anything flagged in these statistics on 124 and 125 that anybody had a question about?
What is, under license denial, what is SO?
Statement of issues.
Okay.
Statement of issues filed. So as I said before, if a candidate is denied, they have the opportunity to essentially appeal that, and it's called a statement of issues that's prepared. It goes to the Attorney General's office and they get a hearing. Okay, so this shows statement of issues filed, how many are withdrawn, how many are dismissed, how many are declined.
On page 126, what is the significance of the number of the license denials on average have doubled?
There is none. We're gonna take that out.
That's going away?
That was in the report last time, and the reason why some of these numbers were there, in the paragraph above, it talks about there was a substantial increase in convictions. That was because we'd been doing the fingerprinting, and so we became aware of some of these things. So that's why we had a rise in the criminal arrests and convictions, because we were starting to get these reports from people who we didn't have fingerprints on. So now we've leveled back out and back down, and so it's more of a manageable. So the number hasn't doubled. Refer back to where we say we denied. So we denied 22 RDA licenses. So that line is coming out. Okay, does anybody, hopefully everybody took a look at the enforcement statistics on page 127. And if you have any questions, as we go down the numbers, for desk investigations, that essentially is our complaint and compliance unit. So that's where the complaints first start, where they start to get records, where they're sent out to our consultants to see whether anything is initially there, to see whether it needs further discussions. The non-sworns, essentially that's our investigative unit, investigative analysis unit. Those are the folks we have working in there, and then the sworn investigations pending. That's how those numbers break out. So there are different groups of people working on different complaints. Going down to the cite and fine, it says reduced, withdrawn, or dismissed. The 5,000 obviously is not a correct number, and neither is 4,800. So those numbers in that line should be, for 15-16, should be 5. There were 2 reduced, withdrawn, or dismissed in 16-17, and 5 with reduced or withdrawn or dismissed in 17-18.
Karen? I was interested in noting that in our, I guess it goes back to enforcement, but it kind of ties with this too. Let's say, inability to support or substantiate continuing education requirements for licensure resulted in a cite and fine.
Yes.
It seems to be a falsification of a record.
Well,
That seems to be a
That's-
professional standards
that's
issue.
true, and they are cited for two reasons. They're cited for, on their renewal, lying, that that they're complete, and then they're cited for not complying with the CE requirement. Now, we theoretically could send them to the AG's office for an accusation and discipline filed, but we're getting pretty good results from just the citation, which is, hey, look, we're serious. These are serious things now, and so we're hoping to change behavior by just the citation and fine. If it happens again, then I'd say it goes to the Attorney General's office.
When I look at the number of active licensees that we have and the percentage of those that are actually audited, it's such a small number. Is that really representative? When we're looking at a 1/12 of 1%, which is about 30 licensees out of the total that we have, and we're looking at a percentage of those that are not compliant with the ability to support, when you look at that over a total of 34,000, we got a lot of them out there.
I think that this could be an issue for future discussion at a board meeting in terms of how we're going about. So we are auditing approximately, did we say 50 a month?
It's approximately 60 total, so about 30 DDS licensees.
Right.
And then within there, making sure that there's a GA or a conscious sedation permit.
Right.
So,
When I came up with the 30, I was specifically DDS.
Right.
Was reported that approximately 30 were audited.
Correct.
Out of 34,000.
We based the percentage of what we're auditing based off what other boards have established as their percentage and based off of what workload we could absorb.
Right, I understand the reason, well, there is a reason for the number that you have chosen to audit. My question is that an adequate number? Is that telling us what we want to know? And again, that's a discussion for a future time.
I think that that's a discussion for a future board meeting. And it's a good question, so we will definitely make note of that and put that as a future discussion. It's interesting how some of these questions come back around, but I recall that at some point when Dr. McCormick was on the board, she thought we were actually auditing too many a month. So we'll look at the trends, see what's happening, and be able to report back. And at a future board meeting, we'll put together an agenda item that has all the background information to see whether the board wants to change up how they're doing things.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Okay, are there any more? So we essentially got through the table on page 127. There are some sections of this that, at the top of page 128, no longer, that should not be that essentially to manage a probationary licensee is 4 times greater than an investigation. It should actually just be 2 times greater, and we're going to be correcting some of the things that were said. I have a question on the first paragraph under improvements. I'm not even really sure what that means, so we'll be looking into that. We're going to be very careful with how we talk about our numbers and whether we're talking about quotas. So we're going to be looking at our report and making sure that the terminology we use is union-friendly. So quotas is probably something that's going to be replaced with perhaps an expectation or a goal or something to that effect. So we'll be changing that reference. On page 129, the first paragraph actually is continuation of the first line of that page. So we'll be cleaning up all those things. Anybody have any questions or comments on page 130 or 131? How about 132, 133? Dr. Chan?
132. middle, Business Profession Code 1680Z.
Yep.
And it talks about the reporting.
Your
Oh, sorry. It talks about the reporting on BP Business Profession Code 1680Z. Is there an actual form that they fill out to report? Oh, there is, okay. Because okay, got it.
There's a form, at this point, there's a courtesy form that's filled out if a death or a hospitalization has occurred with when general anesthesia is used.
Okay, good,
Okay?
okay.
Now, right now, because we don't have it in regulation, it's a courtesy form. The requirement is that they report to us, so they still would have to report all the data points that essentially the board incorporated into the courtesy form. So until the regulation is developed to say this is the reporting form, we accept either the courtesy form or a letter that essentially addresses all the data points that are listed in 1680Z. Now, we'll be talking about that section a little more, and as you know, you may have noted that I left the data empty there to bring back. The analyst that is we lost the analyst that was responsible for taking all that data and putting it into the computer. She took a job at another agency just last week, so we're training up somebody. She and I are working closely now to look at that. And we'll be bringing to the board some of the challenges that we're seeing. 1680Z was changed to say, essentially, it used to say that if a hospitalization occurred, it had to be within a 24-hour period. Well, now a lot of our licensees aren't really sure when they're supposed to report, so we're getting reports for everything. We're getting reports for deaths or hospitalizations regardless of whether any anesthesia is used. You know, if dental procedure was done and then 2 months later they got notified that a patient died, we're getting those reports and we're opening them up. So staff is really gonna be looking at this information and going through it with a fine-tooth comb. We'll account for it, but this is taking away from time that we'll spend in looking at other some of our other cases. This is probably something that the anesthesia committee next year, we're going to try to involve the anesthesia committee in looking at some of this and identifying some of the issues that we're having with this reporting. It appears that people want to be diligent and want to comply with the law, but they're really not sure. They're not sure, so they're sending us everything, and rather than hold back and not send anything.
And the reason for that is that we've had other disciplinary cases where the cause might have been infection, it might have been bleeding, and it seems to have an open narrative for something like that.
Right.
Yeah, but that's the way it is right now.
Right.
Okay.
Before we leave this page, we're talking about prioritizing, and we use words like urgent, you know, in case we need immediate action, high, you know, and actions that do not pose an immediate threat to the public's health, safety, or welfare. And then we get down to routine, and we list allegations relating to general quality of care, fraud, patient abandonment, documentation records. When we list fraud as routine, that's troubling to me in the sense that, and I've talked about this before, when a patient leaves a practice and goes to another city and goes to another dentist and is told that they have 10 or 12 cavities, and the parents are on the phone saying, gee, Tom, did you miss something? And the patient comes back and he has no decay in his mouth. To me, that is fraud. And if you're willing to tell a patient that, to me, that does pose an immediate threat to either your health, your safety, or your welfare. And so I'm concerned that we're not taking fraud to be as serious as it is.
If I may respond to that, and Carlos, you may want to come up to the testimony table. We take fraud very seriously, and we certainly investigate the fraud. They take longer to investigate, taking fraud cases take much longer to investigate. And in the end, we may hand it off to the district attorney for criminal charges. So, I mean, it is taken seriously, but with regard to it's not, it's certainly a very bad practice, but there's no patient harm unless, of course, then you go to excessive treatment that didn't need to be done.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
And there's also a certain amount of threshold that the district attorney has as far as fraud, as far as how much money was actually taken. So they also have a threshold, whereas if it goes over a certain amount of money, they'll look into it and they'll file charges, or they could bring it down to say, okay, there is something here, but there's not enough money, and they'll leave it as a misdemeanor because there was no patient harm. It was just the money.
So is your
that they're
comment, Dr. Stewart, that you would prefer to have fraud not be referenced as a routine?
Yes.
Okay, so we can remove fraud from that paragraph.
I think it's just, our whole profession is based on trust. And when that trust is broken by a professional, the word routine should not apply. That's egregious behavior, and it needs to be dealt with.
Okay.
Can I offer a balance to that?
Yep.
So there are occasions where in the course of following a patient in pediatrics for a long, long time, kid doesn't have a lot of cavities, goes to someone else, has all these cavities, comes back, did you miss it? The difference also can be where you have a baby that has to be put to sleep and you have a lot of questionable ones, and you tell the parent, if the baby's going to be asleep, do all the ones you think have to be done, but it's a judgment call. It's different. It's not fraudulent. It's giving them a choice on doing that. And then there are occasions too where someone takes the baby to sleep, takes them to the hospital, has them asleep, and does so much other things in there under the guise of doing it if you need to put them to sleep. So there's judgment call. That's where the subject matter people come into play. There's differences in the marketplace.
Okay, thank you for your comments. We will look at that whole section and see how we can work that out. Certainly, we don't want to imply, as you're saying, that it's routine or less important to deal with these fraud issues. So we'll take a look at that. Are there any other comments on page 130 or 131? Okay, how about 132, 133? This is the last section that we'll probably be able to do today because we're coming up on 4:30. So if we can get through essentially section 5, we'll take up the rest of it tomorrow. Does anybody have any questions or comments on page 134 or 135? How about 136, 137? Mm-hmm.
I think we're missing an answer there on 46.
Okay. All right. Any more comments on 136 or 137?
So it's just, well, anyway.
And it's just what it's missing, it's just the
I was
table.
wondering about that.
Yeah, but it's answered in that table.
Okay.
So we'll just make sure to make note of that. Okay. Pages 138, 139. So if I can draw your attention to the cost recovery table on 139, the total enforcement expenditures are 6,925,000, 000 for 14-15, 6,925,000. All right. 15-16 is 6,639,000. 16-17 is 6,865,000. And 17-18 is 7,636,000. The remaining two, so the cases for recovery are in case numbers. When you go down to the amount of cost recovery ordered, those numbers are correct. So we're taking off in the beginning at the top of the, where it says list dollars in thousands, remove that because now we've recorded what the actual numbers are. So the cost recovery ordered for 14-15 was 765,525. The rest of the numbers are accurate. Same thing with the amount collected below that. Anybody have any questions? Dr. Chan?
I have a few questions on there. The first thing is that the cost recovery, what we actually recovered, is there a metric that we're compared against with, let's say, other agencies on what percentage we're able to collect?
No.
No. Okay,
We've always taken the, we look at anything recover as sort of gravy.
okay. So the other question is that the net loss after that fiscal year, is that charged as a liability against our cost?
No.
No? And then the trend looks like, and it's not a lot of money considering our overall budget, that the trend is increasing by the time we get to 2017. So 400,000 versus about 200,000.
Right.
Is that doesn't seem significant in the overall.
And what attributes to that is whether or not we settle or go to hearings, bounce up the expenditures.
And are we charged, the charges that the AG charges us, does it stay with us or does it go back to the AG that you can't recover it?
No, the AG gets paid no matter what.
Okay.
We're the ones and I mean, that's why one of our primary existence, so I mean, our budget is built for enforcement.
Okay.
And so anything we can collect, as I said, is great, and we try to do that to the best of our ability. You'll be seeing more and more decisions by the ALJ where the respondent will claim inability to pay. And so we may not get anything out of that. When I'm negotiating a settlement, I ask our staff to tell me how much the AG costs are and our subject matter expert costs. I take out, I diminish it by what our investigative costs are because our people are salaried.
Sure.
So there is some flexibility there.
And then the last question is, can you explain a little bit more about how there was some vignette about the Franchise Tax Board not using them?
Depending on how much money we need to collect, we can use the Franchise Tax Board. And in the past, it was a bit of a cumbersome way, what we had to go through. Now, basically why we have trouble collecting is because people leave the state, and so the Franchise Tax Board isn't going to help us in that.
Okay.
Or we've revoked a license, and essentially there's not a lot we can do about that either. Oftentimes when the license is revoked, they also leave the state. So what we essentially try to make sure that we put in orders, if those who have had revoked licenses reapply for reinstatement, that they have to pay whatever the cost recovery was at that time. So we're trying to make sure we build those in to the orders.
Thank you.
Karen? It might be helpful for our new members, and for me as well, but our budget is built for enforcement. Could you expand on that just a little bit in terms of that statement?
Well, basically, the board exists to license and discipline licensees. That's our mission in the protection of the public. We do that by licensing people and disciplining or holding the licensees essentially accountable to the Dental Practice Act. So that's why the board exists.
And the percentage of our budget that goes strictly for enforcement
Is the highest percentage.
roughly?
75%. And
Last time we ran the numbers when we were doing the fee increase, about 70% of our budget goes to enforcement.
And that's how we justified it essentially when the associations were saying, oh, we didn't realize that high percentage of your budget goes to enforcement. Okay, we want you to continue to enforce the Dental Practice Act. So that's what we mean by a majority of what we do is intended to go toward enforcement. Now, wherever we can, we certainly are trying to collect as much money, reimbursement of the cost as we can. And that's about the best we can do.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay? Any other questions about section 5? Hallelujah, we're done for the day. Thank you. Come refreshed tomorrow because section 9 is going to be very important, current issues. We haven't discussed that. Section 11 is going to be very important. Section 10, you've seen at least 2 times prior to this meeting. There should be no surprises in section 10. That's our response to prior issues. So, we'll try to just go through this. Tomorrow, the bulk of our discussion will most likely be 501, SB 501 in legislation. We will have representative here to update us on the latest of what's happening with that bill. Did we pass out copies? Okay, so as we're kind of tying up here, Jerry's going to pass out copies of at least 501, Jerry, and give you the copies of the updated legislation so that if you've got time tonight to take a look at that, we'll be talking about certain pieces of legislation tomorrow. And we'll try to motor through this, but it could be likely we would break maybe by 2.
Karen, we're going to do closed session tonight?
We're going to do closed session still tonight. So those that, so the full board will stick around for closed session, and then the LCP committee. Closed session should be hopefully pretty short, so everybody could get out of here at a reasonable hour. Did you have anything else you wanted to? 9 o'clock, the meeting will start tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Just to explain, for board members that live within the 50 miles of the meeting, when we have commuters, we try to start later to allow time for people to get here. So that's why 9 o'clock. Typically, if we have a meeting where all the board members are at the hotel, we can start earlier. So that's the reason. So we're going to start at 9. We can't really start any earlier because it's a published meeting, and some public won't be here if we start earlier. Okay? Does anybody else have any questions? Are you ready to go into closed session?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to go into closed session. Jerry is passing out the amended legislation. So, and everybody else who's not in closed session can pack up.